Wherever you're listening in the world, it's a pleasure to welcome you to IsraelCast, the podcast powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. I'm Steven Shalowitz, first reminding you that for over 120 years, Jewish National Fund USA has been the premier philanthropic movement for the land and people of Israel. While best known for planting trees in Israel, JNF USA contributes to Israeli life in so many ways, including community development in the Negev and the Galilee, preservation of heritage sites, supporting people with disabilities, and connecting high school and college students to Israel, as well as helping our brothers and sisters in need following the heinous October 7th terrorist attack. To learn more and to see how you can contribute, do visit jnf.org. Once again, jnf.org. Plus, if you haven't done so already, we'd absolutely love it if you subscribed, rated, and reviewed us 5 stars, of course. Wherever you get your podcasts, it's so easy, and we'd love it too if you shared the show within your universe. Now, as for this episode, what an absolute honor it is for me to welcome Aryeh Lightstone to the program. From 2017 to 2021, Aryeh served as the senior advisor to David Friedman, the most influential U.S. ambassador to Israel. In his supporting role, Aryeh helped advance U.S. Israel bilateral relations with a focus on technology cooperation, infrastructure expansion, and economic development. He was appointed Special Envoy for Economic Normalization, serving as the point person in Israel for the implementation of the Abraham Accords. His book, Let My People Know, The Incredible Story of the Middle East Peace and What Lies Ahead, recounts his years working on behalf of the U.S. and Israel. It's a must-read, and you can pick up a copy wherever you like to buy your books. Before joining the State Department, Aryeh worked as an educator, rabbi, management professional, entrepreneur, and issue advocate. He's a Denver native and now splits his time between Israel and the United States with his family, his wife, and may I add 4 adorable children. Aryeh joins us now on the line via Zoom from Florida. Aryeh, welcome to IsraelCast.
Thank you for having me. Before we get anywhere else, I don't know if any of your listeners will care what I have to say. Over the course of my time in Israel, when I was in the U.S. government, and especially since October 7th, the JNF is a great organization. It is a pillar of the success of Israel. And I was, as you were reading through the thing, I'm like, oh, this is awesome, because I run into the JNF in so many different places that have such a meaningful impact, and that makes me much more excited to be on the podcast with you.
All right. We're so glad that you could carve out the time because we know how crazy busy you are these days. And Aryeh, I do want to share with our listeners, though, before we get started in our conversation, that you are also a guest on the One Way Ticket Show podcast that I also produced and host. So if our dear listeners, if you would like to learn and hear more from Aryeh, I do hope you do, because there's a lot to share. Do visit the onewayticketshow.com or just search for the One Way Ticket Show wherever you get your podcast. You can see it up right now, and you'll really enjoy that conversation. We just recorded it. And there's a lot to talk about when Aryeh Lightstone is in the house. And indeed, Aryeh, I just want to ask you first, as we begin our conversation, what do you really think a second Trump administration will look like vis-a-vis Israel?
Yeah, I think the second Trump administration is going to look fantastic for people who are looking for a better and brighter future. And that starts here at home in the United States of America and will expand outwards towards our friends and our allies. And Israel is the one that I know best, but I believe all of our friends and our allies are looking forward to a new opportunity for meaningful success. And success is not defined purely as prosperity, but success, I think, actually comes from safety and security. And that's one of the primary issues that President Trump ran on, and I believe he's going to deliver. I think the first term, the common idea was promises made, promises kept, and now I think President Trump is promising even bigger, and I believe will deliver even bigger.
All right. Well, one of the points that was driven home for me in your book, Aryeh, is just how much the foreign policy arena is an echo chamber. And I'd like you to dissect that for a moment, first starting with NGOs and the role that they have in the food chain of developing policy. If you can take us into the world of how the sausage is really made, because I don't think a lot of people really understand it.
Yeah, no, this is one of the unfortunate pieces, how well-meaning people make decisions with bad information. And maybe the best example of that is when President Trump was asked to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. much of, and you should read about this in Ambassador Friedman's book and in Jared Kushner's book. They both played a instrumental role in that historic moment. But just it's great as an illustrative idea. Um, the volume of intel and data that explained to the president that this was a terrible idea was literally carted in like in cases by everybody in the security and the intelligence establishment. There wasn't a single person who said this is a good idea. There was sheet after paper after sheet after paper after sheet after paper saying that this will be a disastrous idea. And one of the reasons why they claimed it would be a disastrous idea is one of the ways that we get information. We get information as the United States of America by having key contacts around the world. Now, the countries that we're posted in, that our embassies are posted in, know that we have key contacts in these countries, and they put in front of our key employees their key contacts. So we are providing for them their way or mechanism of delivering the information that they want to into our decision makers. And even more than that, we're mandated by a congressional law to report based upon various different ideas. One is the Human Rights Report, the other is international religious freedom. And these are wonderful things. We believe in human rights and we believe in international freedom, but I don't believe in either of these things being perverted by non-governmental agencies who've decided to manipulate the system in order to wind up getting their way. So what winds up happening is an NGO can be posted and pick a place. I mean, Israel, people like to think it's controversial, but they'll take a person in Area C. And that NGO, which is part of the disputed territories on the Judean Samaria or West Bank, and they'll take an area there and they'll report back that X, Y, and Z happened. And they publish that. Now, by law, we are obligated, we, the United States of America, are obligated to include their published report in our report that we turn into Congress that describes international religious freedom or human rights, etc. Nobody checks to see if that organization is accurate. Nobody checks to see if what that organization says happened. And therefore, you wind up with it gets published by the embassy. It goes up to Congress. Somebody at the CIA or State Department or president may actually go ahead and make a decision based upon that information. The funders of that NGO will say, how great was our investment? We actually, for $100,000 or $1 million, enabled a decision to be made by the Secretary of State or the President of the United States of America. I'm going to double it. And that NGO is now suddenly larger. And that NGO is not incentivized to be able to find out what the truth is. That NGO is incentivized to create whatever they want their donor to be able to continue to give them funds for. And we create this ecosystem that just happens over and over and over again that creates bad data in. And I was an accounting major for a year and I don't remember anything from it, but I do remember in the very first class, bad data in will by definition lead us to bad data out. And they did use a different word, that professor, so I'm not going to use it on the podcast. But if you're making decisions based upon bad information, you're going to wind up making bad decisions. And our system is created in such a way that it incentivizes bad information to come in.
Garbage in, garbage out, in other words. And then let's not
That's
forget that's not only the United States, but say, for example, Western European nations are also getting that information and they're basing their decisions on that. We know how much more liberal they are and how much more antagonistic they are than many other countries are towards Israel.
forget even that. Although that's an excellent point. Um, Diplomats tend to move around countries, but within the same region. So if you are a French diplomat or a Canadian diplomat or a British diplomat, you are likely following your friends from our allied nations from place to place to place to place. And the people that you interact with are the other diplomats in those places from place to place to place. So it's not a one-way echo chamber. It's a spherical echo chamber. It comes to the Dutch and to the French and to the British and to the Americans. And these are the people that we trade notes with. But when we trade notes with them, we don't realize we're all looking at the same notes, just delivered by different people. And so that information doesn't become better. That bad information is just reinforced.
And related to that is the media. And I don't know if I have a particular question for you, Aryeh, but what were your dealings with the media and their reporting on the work the U.S. was doing in Israel to try and move the needle forward? I mean, what was their response to what you were trying to do?
My general feeling was not to read any of the media because I felt that pro media, and there wasn't a lot of it, but there were certain people who were very excited to see a breath of fresh air, look at the Middle East, set expectations that were never going to be achieved. Short of the Messiah coming down from the Mount of Olives, we were never going to please a group, and it was a minority, but it was the group that we would tend to read a little bit more often. And the other group, it seemed that every morning we were waking up that we were going to be the cause of nuclear war or some human rights disaster. And the truth was, neither of those were correct. And I think I became pretty immune to this pretty early on because I remember being in a meeting and it was an important meeting. It wasn't a critical meeting. It was an important meeting. And a day later, the exact context of the meeting were leaked and written about it as though it was factual, which would have been fine had there been a leak and had it been factual. But it had the right people, but none of the correct outcomes or comments from the meeting were actually accurately reported. And they ran with it as repeated sources, and other people quoted this story as their primary source. And you went up with an entire echo chamber from the media being confident in knowing what they thought had happened when none of it had actually happened. I'm like, okay, none of these guys know what's going on over here. So put our head down, do the best work that we can, keep your ears open to be able to listen, to always be able to learn more, but don't worry about what other people who are not in the room are going to say because they're not in the room.
Mm. Ari, I want to switch and shift to the Abraham Accords, which you worked on intimately. And is there anything that would surprise us to know about how it came about, or anything that was anecdotal that surprised you as they were coming into fruition?
I'll give you in 2019, Jared Kushner and Stephen Mnuchin, along with the King of Bahrain, hosted the Peace to Prosperity workshop. And this is sort of the um, introduction to the concept that there has a chance for this thing that was not yet named the Abraham Accords. And I didn't really know what to do in Israel as a proud U.S. diplomat, but as an identifiable Orthodox Jew. Most Israelis listened to my Hebrew and figured out quickly that I was American. My big American flag on my lapel didn't hurt either. But the question was, when I walked into Bahrain, what would I wear? How would I be identified? And there were numerous people in the U.S. State Department who were very concerned about being a obvious Orthodox Jew. And that had me nervous because, look, it's a personal decision for me. One does not need to wear a head covering. Again, we're not going to get into that right now. So if I'm going to put the mission at risk, maybe I'm not the right guy, or maybe I should change what I'm doing. And so I used some of my network and I found somebody that I highly respected in Bahrain. And it took me a couple days to get in touch with him. I remember it was 2 days before I departed. And I reached out to him and I said, look, I have two questions for you. And he says, sure, shoot, what are they? I said, I don't know if I should be comfortable wearing a kippah, wearing a Orthodox Jewish or a Jewish head covering coming to Bahrain. What do you think? He goes, well, I think you don't need to ask me a second question. Said, what do you mean? He goes, it's really offensive that you would think that you couldn't be yourself when you come to my home. What do you think of me with that? How low are your expectations of me that you think that I would view you differently or judge you differently or treat you differently because you are yourself when you shut up to my house? How frankly disrespectful or bigotry of lowest expectations are that? And I immediately did not ask my second question, although it was a very friendly question about something else, but took that as a of why am I going to possibly compromise? Now, I had a superpower, and that superpower was the American flag on my lapel. When you walk someplace with an American flag on your lapel, you are not you. You are 350 million people and the most powerful military in the history of the world. So I'm not recommending that one walks with a kippah without doing appropriate diligence on the safety and the security of a place. But I learned very early on that Bahrain and UAE and Morocco, which were opaque to me, I had not been to any of them prior to getting on that plane, wanted to know me as I was. They didn't want me to pretend to be anybody else. And the welcoming and the kindness, and they opened up the synagogue for us to pray. I believe it was the first time synagogue had been opened up in the 60s, 70s, 80s, but it was many, many decades for us to pray. And we prayed that morning. And one of the things that I remember actually having nothing to do with Americans or Bahrainis or Israelis, but the Jews that went to pray in the synagogue that morning, I think there were 12 of us, likely would have never been caught dead in the same room as each other at any point in time. I mean, wide uh, divergence of opinions and personalities and observance and all of those things. And at the conclusion of prayers, we all grasped hands and we sang and we danced. Then we were nervous maybe somebody will take a piece of picture. It's going to ruin all of our reputations. But it was amongst the things that happened through the beginning of the Abraham Accords is it brought Jews closer together. And I thought that was pretty awesome also.
Can you give us a sense then of Israel's relations with Abraham Accord countries post October 7th? What's the temperature check there?
Well, it's an important temperature check. Number one, do not underestimate whatever you see in the media here in the US or in the West, multiply that by 10x in what happens in the Middle East. Uh, Certainly on the social media, but in the regular media as well. There are not two sides to this story over there. There's only one side to that story, and that story has Israel as the villain, certainly since October 8th. Israel has primarily been portrayed as the villain. And that does have a meaningful effect on hearts and minds of the citizens of these countries. And the warmth and the enthusiasm and the excitement that existed certainly 4 years ago and 3 years ago and 2 years ago, that will need to be rebuilt in a major way. Now, I'm pleased to report, as large as the challenge is on the people to people, the government to government is incredibly strong. The trade is incredibly strong and growing. And the countries, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco specifically, are able to point to very, very specific actions that they have been able to take to help innocent Gazans in a way that other countries that don't have relationships with the state of Israel have not been able to take. So there's a lot of finger wagging from much of the Middle East, but practical help being delivered to Gazans who need that help is almost exclusively being delivered by the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and the Moroccans. And credit to them, again, assuming that this isn't just about yelling at somebody, but it's about actually helping people, which one could be confused whether they think that's the case or not. All of the credit is really due to the countries who have embraced the Abraham Accords.
By the way, I just have one question because you talk in the book about the Peace to Prosperity Conference, as you just mentioned, and you talk about there were a couple, only a few Palestinian businessmen that showed up. And it was seen that their participation was treacherous. And I'm just
Yep.
wondering if you know whatever happened to them. What was their fate?
So they were all maligned and belittled, and in some cases imprisoned or persecuted once they returned back. Um, One family was particularly harassed to the point that they had to go into hiding for a meaningful period of time. There's one father participant in the program who, without divulging more information, sacrificed a meaningful amount to show up at this conference. I mean, a meaningful amount to show up at this conference. And whenever there was a breakthrough, he was always my third phone call after my wife and my parents. I would always call this person because I believe at the end of the day, the greatest beneficiaries of the Abraham Accords will be the Israeli Arabs. And immediately after them will be the Palestinians who wish to build a better future for them and their children. And Israel, I mean, if you look just purely at the economics of it, it's nice, but it's not the American market. It's not the European market. If you look at the security apparatus, it doesn't replace the relationship with the United States, etc. And it's going to be a 25-year process to be integrated into the region. But if if you spend time with Israeli Arabs who've been looking for what's their place in the region, and you look at the surveys that say if you were born as a Arab Christian or Arab Muslim today, what city, and this goes back now 4 years ago, I'm not familiar with today's current stats, what city would you like to be born in the Middle East? It used to be Dubai and then Abu Dhabi and then Haifa. So it gives such a sense of opportunity. And I am 100% convinced that in this upcoming administration, there will be a strong focus on the Israeli Arab bridge, as well as the opportunity for Palestinians who wish to take advantage of that, to take advantage of that in a meaningful way.
Yeah, because the Arab Street, I mean, from what I've gleaned from my travels in the region, it's not monolithic.
No,
And I had
no.
actually, I think I might have mentioned this on the program. There's someone that I befriended in Iraq when I was there. And shortly after October 7th, I got a message from him saying, I'm so tired of all of this fundamentalism. I just want to get out of here and move to Europe.
If you're tired of fundamentalism, I'm not positive
Yeah.
going to Europe.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't know, maybe he might need to come here for that, but well, I don't know about coming here. I don't know where he's going to go except maybe Israel, but the point is that it's not a monolith in terms of the
Right.
Arab Street, and there are so many people. We had I'm sure you know him, Hussein Abdul Hussein here from the FDD on the program, and he talked all about that, how his family, his friends have reached out to him and shared this information about really what they're thinking out there. And it's very different than what we are shown on the news every
Well,
night.
as you say that, and you're going to a question, I think it's actually really important for
Mhm.
your audience to know. UAE does not have fundamentalism. Uh, Bahrain does not have fundamentalism. Morocco has very, very little. Saudi does not have. That there's a fundamental desire from the leadership there to create a society that's truly, and the word tolerant isn't even the right word, but is welcoming and encouraging for all who wish to play by the rules. And those rules have that as safety and security as first and foremost.
My 94, soon to be 95-year-old Holocaust surviving rabbi, Rabbi Arthur Schneier from Park East, actually does not use the word tolerant or tolerance. He believes in using the term mutual respect. And I think that there is that mutual respect out there. And so that's really
Okay.
indeed what you're talking about. So we've invoked Saudi Arabia several times in this conversation. You know where I'm going with this question. Saudi Arabia and the Abraham Accords, what needs to happen, Aryeh?
Well, if you haven't been to Saudi Arabia in the last 10 years, you should go.
Yeah.
And if you never thought you'd ever go to Saudi Arabia, you should go. It is undergoing one of the most interesting transformations likely in the history of humanity. And we should be rooting, we the Americans should be rooting relentlessly for their success. And I hope, and it's legitimately part of my prayers, that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia succeeds in all of their innovations and pathways to be able to not only reach Vision 2030, but to reach Vision 2075, because I think it's fantastic for the world. Um, and it shouldn't be underestimated that more than a billion Muslims look towards Saudi Arabia 5 times a day. And what Saudi Arabia looks like has a distinct and important effect on the rest of the world of Islam. And I think that's really important. Now, how does that all dovetail with the state of Israel? That's a great question. And I think will be a priority of a Trump administration. I think the region will reach new heights when the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the State of Israel achieve normalization. I haven't been in government for the last 4 years, so I don't know what the current status is. I don't know if it's a day one or year two opportunity. Part of that is that, as I think explained before, it was a failure of the Biden administration not to continue as though there was a Trump administration. It would be a mistake of the Trump administration to walk in as though there never was a Biden administration. Facts on the ground have changed meaningfully. Saudi is now 4 years closer to Vision 2030. Israel is now a year plus into a war for its survival. The UAE hosted COP and has succeeded in doing so many different things that were not even dreamt of just 4 years ago. And so the world is different. I do think that the end is still the same, which is that peace and prosperity will benefit all people, and that will be a goal and a target of this administration.
In Aryeh, just on a lighter note, I must say, if for nothing else, folks should visit Saudi Arabia just to visit Maidan Saleh, which is the large Nabatean city there. It's the Petra of Saudi Arabia, and it is just a phenomenal, phenomenal archaeological site to visit. I was there in 2022, and it was just, I was first there in 2018 in Saudi, and I noticed a precipitous change in the country and how much more it really developed in many ways. And its trajectory is just extraordinary. So it really is a remarkable country. It's very easy to get around and to travel through. So we do hope that everybody visits. And again, I hope that, the day will come soon when, of course, they are part of the Abraham Accords. One thing that I try to understand is the dynamic between Arab nations and the Palestinians, and if at all they have any sway over the people in the West Bank, the government in the West Bank, and that in Gaza as well. And I'm wondering if you can address that for us, Aryeh.
Well, I think it's really important to try to understand that this also is not monolithic.
Mhm.
Gaza is not the same as the West Bank. There are different cities in the West Bank that are not the same as other ones. There's leadership, certainly Hamas leadership and Palestinian Authority leadership, and those aren't the same as the people. I do believe that amongst the people who have been most disadvantaged by their quote leaders, and I use quote leaders because from my perspective, leadership is more about your followers than it is about yourself. And I view both the leadership of the Palestinian Authority and the leadership of Hamas has never been about the Palestinian people. It's been either about we've all seen what Hamas is about, and to contextualize. I'll come back to that part in a second, actually, because I think that's really important to be able to understand. And the leadership of the Palestinian Authority, to a great degree, is a kleptocracy. It is a great way to continue to not make important decisions, but to continue to have the gravy train run, and that's the gravy train that is brought upon by the peace processors. If you look at Gaza, I mean, it's tens of billions of dollars were poured into that for what? And over the course of 15, 16 years, we were surprised not to see like universities being built and to see subways weren't bad. They built tunnels, just not for subways, saying that billions of dollars. Where did it go? Why is the net worth of Hamas leadership in Qatar worth more than any of the CEOs of any of the startups that we've invested in? How is that possible? What have they built other than a enterprise whose entire job is to create terror? Where does that money come from? It's not all coming from Iran. Much of it comes from us in the West, and that's reprehensible and terrible and needs to be stopped. When it goes to the Palestinian Authority, also, it's been, and that's what Jared Kushner and President Trump put out, which was a realistic peace plan on January 28th, 2020, gave an opportunity for the Palestinians to reach for something. They chose to spit on it instead. Um, I've met many Palestinians who want a better future. I'm not silly enough to say, based upon driving in a cab with somebody, that I know what the Palestinian people want. But I do believe that people at their core are looking for something different. October 7th have shaken people to their core. Let's not pretend for a moment that Israel is prepared at all to go into something that resembles the old paradigm. They're not prepared for that. They're not interested in that. I don't think it would be useful as an ally to try to push or to encourage or to cajole them to be able to get there. But I do believe that Israelis are very, very fundamentally interested in creating a better, brighter, and more peaceful and secure future for all of the people who live in the region. And that extends to Jordanians and Egyptians. Extremism in Jordan is going to come and hurt Israel. Extremism in Egypt is going to come and hurt Israel. We've seen what extremism in Lebanon has done, right? We've seen what extremism in Gaza has done. So there needs to be an opportunity where that does not exist. And that is not a tomorrow thing. It is not something that's going to be solved like this. But there's going to be a long, hard path, but we only succeed in crossing that path. We're ready and prepared to make hard decisions.
And Aryeh, what's next for Gaza then? I mean, how do you demilitarize, which is being done right now, and how do you de-radicalize? Who's going to rebuild it? What are your thoughts?
I got a lot of thoughts. I'd rather keep those to myself at this current point in
Okay.
time because that one of the greatest things, and I'm not in any position at this point in time, but I speak to a fair amount of people that care deeply about this. I obviously care deeply about this. Perhaps the greatest thing that we learned from Jared Kushner and David Friedman and others was, don't tell everybody what you're going to do. Just get it done, and it'll become easier. In the Middle East, there's so many people who are incentivized to keep the status quo or make it even worse,
Mhm.
that why give them an opportunity when you have a path to fix something, fix it, and let them wake up in the morning and see, surprise, it's fixed. Don't give them the opportunity to destroy something before it gets going. And this, by the way, is the difference between leadership and non-leadership. Are people prepared to have a real vision? And you can see the countries in the Middle East based upon their leaders and vision. And we should do another survey. I'm sure there have been surveys where if you were born today, which country would you rather be born in? And that line is going to be divided based upon leaders and people who think that they're leading.
I want to then put the spotlight on UNRWA just for a moment. And do you think that the conversation around UNRWA and what has been exposed since October 7th in any way will change the organization? I don't expect it to be dismantled, but if you can also just talk a little bit about that.
UNRWA is broken.
Mhm.
President Trump acknowledged that in the first term. Don't fund things that don't work. Because it always has been, doesn't mean it always needs to be. UNRWA can't be fixed. Uh, but it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be roles that UNRWA should have been doing, could be created from scratch. But it's in the DNA of what UNRWA is doing, and their inability to even acknowledge that in real time and to be able to try to combat against it. It just shows that it's an agenda-based organization. It's not the agenda that its funders are interested in funding it for. It's certainly not an agenda that is in the interest of the United States of America funding it
Mhm.
for. And so we have to have a hard look, what works and what doesn't work. What doesn't work, let's stop it. What does work, let's invest in it. And let's find the hole in between the two, and let's create something else that'll be part of it.
And just staying with the United Nations, and as you were talking, I was listening to every word, of course, but I was flipping to your book on page 170. I had made a note here that really talks about Israel can't trust the international community for security. And you wrote this book in 2022, so it was before October 7th and October 8th when Hezbollah started attacking Israel from the north, and the complete failure of UNIFIL. And I want you to address that, how Israel really needs to, dare I say, go it alone and can't trust organizations like the United Nations or let's say the United States, to really fill a certain vacuum.
Right. First of all, the United States doesn't want to be there. And
Yeah.
that's great. I don't think it's our job as the United States of America to wind up being in circumstances like that. And what Israel has decided, look, who else does Israel have to rely upon? It's really just the United States of America. And I don't think Israel wants to jeopardize that relationship by having U.S. troops in the way of being able to be secure. But what Israel has noticed, there are two things that have happened since October 7th and October 8th. The Gazans had full control over what happened within Gaza for the better part of 14, 15, 16 years. And this is what they chose to be able to build a organization fully committed to the annihilation of the state of Israel. Um, and then Israel retreated from Lebanon also more than 20 years ago. And the commitment from the international community for that retreat was, don't worry, we, the international community led by UNIFIL, will be able to stop the rebuilding. And it's a joke. It's been a joke for at least 12 years, because I remember being briefed on this when I first came into the embassy. UNIFIL does not do their job. And the fact that we left them there gave the premise that maybe they are doing their job. And when you're hired to do something and you don't do it, it's far worse than not having somebody there at all. And that any CEO would know, and any leader would know. But sometimes in the Middle East, we just cover our eyes and pretend not to see stuff. And UNIFIL is likely a boondoggle for other countries who have their army paid for mostly by the United States of America. And it's time again. This is the way to look at the region. What works, invest in it. What doesn't work, stop it. Because if it doesn't work, it's causing harm. It's not causing good. And let's double down on things like the Abraham Accords, and let's get rid of things like UNIFIL and UNRWA, and we can come up with something else in order to keep Israel secure and to allow Lebanon to become Lebanese again and not Hezbollah.
Ari, I love what you told the Sudanese when you were negotiating for them to normalize ties with Israel and why they should. And it really showed to me that there was no daylight between the United States and Israel. And I'm wondering if you can share that with our listeners.
Yeah, I mean, why is Sudan even relevant to the Abraham Accords? And unfortunately, many of the places that I went to go see in Sudan, I watched live on TV as they were blown up in the middle of
Yeah.
a civil war. And part of this is, they wanted to turn a new page, and the United States of America under the newer administration, under the Biden administration, did not help them get there, and it devolved again. The vacuum of U.S. leadership turns into the Russians, the Chinese, and in the case of Sudan, the Iranians. But the premise was Sudan wanted to turn over a new leaf with the United States of America. And in previous administrations, whether that would have been acceptable or not acceptable, I don't know the answer to that, but it would not have insisted on Sudan reforming their behavior in other places. And what ultimately the message was from the top, from President Trump, was let's stop the artificial might not be the correct word, but let's stop this. It's just accepted in the international world that you're allowed to treat Israel differently than you treat every other country. But we, the United States of America, will deal with you regardless of how you treat Israel. And the answer was, Sudan, you want something from the United States of America? We'll absolutely consider that. But we actually want something else in return. And that's something the United States of America was never good at asking for. We had this sort of charitable piece. And we know what happens with charity. People resent receiving the charity, and you ultimately resent giving the charity. And President Trump put on the investing mentality. I'm going to invest in you because you should have a better opportunity. But for that, I need a return. And part of that return is normalizing with Israel. And that was exactly the right way to look at the region. People called it transactional, and that's correct. It is transactional. Anybody who invests, there's a transaction. I will do something for now because it will be better for me and for you down the road. I can give charity only for a certain period of time. It's an unfunded liability. They don't get any better and I don't get any better. And ultimately, we're going to start to dislike each other a lot. And that actually explains a lot about U.S. foreign policy for the last 30 years, minus the 4 years of President Trump.
We've invoked your former boss, Ambassador David Friedman, several times here in this conversation. Ari, what do you think was his secret sauce?
Oh, Ambassador Friedman. I mean, he's brilliant. He's kind. I can go on with adjectives for a lengthy period of time. I spent more time with him than my wife and my kids combined for 4 years, and so I appreciate that relationship to the nth degree. But at the end of the day, he had President Trump's cell phone number, and he had President Trump's trust, and he had Jared Kushner's cell phone number and Jared Kushner's trust. And in the United States government, the most precious commodity is time. And if you can, any ambassador can write a memo that makes its way up to ultimately maybe the Secretary of State, and maybe that makes it to a briefing that ultimately makes it. It's time. It's time. And when you speak on behalf of the president, when you speak on behalf of the United States of America, you have a unique power that has been untapped into really throughout all of history because it's unique to this moment and to this time. And that's what Ambassador Friedman carried with them more than anything else.
Will we be seeing him in a second administration in some sort of incarnation, do you think? Or,
No, I can't even speculate on what the
okay.
administration ultimately looked like. But I will tell you this, that everybody involved with the Abraham Accords, everybody involved with strengthening the U.S. Israel relationship will continue to be involved with the Abraham Accords and the U.S. Israel relationship, whether that's in the private sector and the public sector. Here's the greatest advantage to all of the I call them friends, but more like brothers and sisters that I had the privilege of working with. Um, Nobody had to be convinced that this was a good idea for the United States of America. Everybody wanted to do this, and this was a unique and enormous privilege. And whether that happens with a private sector paycheck or a public sector paycheck or volunteerism, everybody is going to be rowing to strengthen the U.S. Israel relationship and the Abraham Accords. No
By
doubt.
the way, when you say time, you brought up, I think twice in the book, this whole notion that when a president, for example, would go, or not necessarily just a president, but any government official from the United States would go from a country with which it does not have ties with Israel, it would have to stop in Jordan for a quote unquote technical stop, right? It would not be able to go directly to Israel. Yet President Trump went from Saudi to Israel. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that. And do U.S. officials still maintain that?
I don't know if U.S. officials today still maintain that technical stop. If they do, that is a retreat that should be
But
unforgivable.
but talk about the background for our listeners that
Yeah.
might not know it, because I didn't know it because I never really even thought about it.
What happened was that because Israel does not have relations in the region, certainly before the Abraham Accords, other than with Jordan and Egypt, is that to travel from Saudi or from UAE prior to the Abraham Accords or from Morocco, you would have to stop someplace, Jordan or Egypt, on your way to Israel because the two countries did not have a relationship. So President Trump's first international trip involved him going to Saudi Arabia, Israel, and ultimately to Rome, i.e., the three major religions. And this was a major push by him. And he was in Saudi Arabia. And if you haven't watched those videos, you should. I mean, a show like that, I don't know, has ever been seen on the face of this earth, just wild and incredible. And the president takes off from Saudi and he looks at his pocket. He's got one of these schedules, these calendars that shows you your day divided into minutes, and it shows that he's landing in Jordan. I wasn't on the plane. I wasn't even in the government at that point in time. But as it was told to me, he asked, why was he stopping in Jordan? He was told, well, you have to stop because Israel and Saudi Arabia don't have relations. And the president says, but I'm America and we have relations with Saudi and we have relationships with Israel. So we're just going to fly straight. And the team scrambled. And that was the first ever direct flight from Saudi Arabia to Israel, basically because it was an outsider on the plane who said, this is a waste of my time. And I'm the president of the United States of America, and I only have one commodity, and it's called time. And every minute that goes by is another minute that I'm not the president of the United States of America again. And he did that. And by doing that, that really, maybe more than anything else, set the standard for, wait, really? We've had officials stopping for a technical stop for the last 70 years? Add up how many minutes and times that is of people whose job is to represent the United States of America that we did not fly directly because somebody else told us not to do that. That's like President Trump's approach to opening up his embassy, the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem. There were other countries who didn't like that. It's not the embassy of those other countries; it's the embassy of the United States of America. It's the fulfillment of a law passed by a broad bipartisan majority from 1996 that no other president had the courage to be able to do because those other presidents were more concerned about what other world leaders were telling him than what American voters were telling him. And that was what President Trump decided to do. And it really set forth the ability to say, we're looking at a different world. Let's go do it.
And subsequently, other nations opened up their embassies in Jerusalem.
Not enough, but yes, subsequently some have. And it will be interesting to see if that happens towards the beginning of the Trump administration. It's a great question. I don't know the answer to that.
Just one or two more bases before we wrap, because I'm super mindful of your time. Um, by the way, speaking of airplanes, so you flew back with Prime Minister Netanyahu on his plane after he signed the Abraham Accords in Washington. What was that experience like? And
Oh my
how was the food, by the way?
uh, that flight we flew back, we landed right before Rosh Hashanah. And so that was exciting. It was the only flight that we could have taken to come back. And I remember actually two very distinct feelings. Number one is they sat me in coach, and I was furious. I've been accused of a lot of things, and an overinflated sense of self-importance is one of them. That much is for sure. But it would have been sleepless. We'd been putting this thing together, and there were other people part of the team who couldn't find Bahrain or UAE on a map who were sitting in business, and it really made me upset. And I called my wife just as we were taxing, and she could hear the anger in my voice. And she goes, Aryeh Lightstone, you had a chance to play a role in Israel normalizing relations with two countries. Now you're flying back to spend Rosh Hashanah with our family in Israel on the airplane of the Prime Minister of the State of Israel. And the words out of your mouth sound like you're complaining. When you land, that sure as heck should not be your tone. And for history, that shouldn't be your outlook. And she's 100% correct. And this, by the way, was to me an incredibly valuable lesson. Sometimes we just make really bad decisions based upon my feelings at that very moment. And sometimes when you get brought back down to earth by your family or your close friends, that's the greatest way to be able to continue to make good decisions and not bad decisions. Nonetheless, the plane ride was fantastic.
In the food?
Mediocre minus.
Okay, just between us. Listen, Aryeh, I always like to leave on a high note. You know Israel intimately. Favorite spot, favorite experience in Israel you want to share before we sign off?
Oh, oh, can I take 3 minutes on this
You
one?
can take as long as you want. Listen, my time is your
Okay.
time, my friend.
Now, this I want to end on. If anybody stayed with us till now, I hope you did, because this to me is what gets me up in the morning in a meaningful way. Um, they did a study, and I'm going to misquote it because I haven't looked it up in a couple of weeks now. But there was a study that the New York Times quoted that described kids who went to go take a test, a standardized test, and 8, 9, and 10 year olds, they took this test, and that established their baseline. And then they went back that night to their homes, and their parents were told, read them stories about superheroes. And the kids were able to choose who their favorite superhero was. And they were given costumes of their favorite superhero. And then they watched a movie of their favorite superhero. This went on for 2 or 3 weeks. And they were told to come back 3 weeks later dressed up like their favorite superhero and to take the standardized test dressed up like that superhero. And the kids did that. And the kids scored somewhere between 15 and 30% better on that standardized test because they didn't take it as John, Lucy, and Sally, but they took it as Batman and Robin and Superman and Wonder Woman. And if you've been in Israel, if you've gone to visit Israel on October 6th, there were countless people that I wouldn't hire to run my bagel store. Um, but on October 7th in the morning, they put on their superhero costumes and have accomplished, they've accomplished achieving their greatest sense of self and purpose that I don't believe that they ever thought that they would be able to accomplish. And when you ask where my favorite place in Israel is, I like to play the game with my kids when we go to Gold's Ice Cream, when we go to the wing store, when we go to the dry cleaning place, and we look at the people that are waiting in front of us in line. And I tell my kids, can you imagine? We are in line at the ice cream store or the dry cleaning store, and the person in front of us is Judah the Maccabee. The person in front of us is like King David. The person in front of us is like, sorry, I get very choked up when I think
Yeah.
about this. The person in front of us is like Mordechai and Alevich. These are heroes who are in front of us. Every place in Israel is my favorite place because you get to be with people who are achieving in their minds, and I think the minds of other people who care about the Western world, their ultimate calling. And I'm optimistic that we're weeks, if not months, away from people going back and pushing each other in the store and fighting over the next funding round for the startup and trying to figure out how to triple park on a Friday before Shabbat. So I can't go get the takeout that I'm looking for. I'm looking forward to that moment. But in the meantime, my favorite place is every place that you get to meet an Israeli who's demonstrated that sense of resilience.
Absolutely beautiful. And Aryeh Lightstone, we're going to leave it right there. We want to thank you so much for joining us on this episode of IsraelCast. Once again, Aryeh's book is Let My People Know, the incredible story of Middle East peace and what lies ahead. It recounts his years working on behalf of the U.S. in Israel. And as I said at the top of the show, it's a must read, and you can pick up a copy wherever you like to buy your books. You can thank me later for suggesting it. All right. And for you, our dear listeners, I just want to remind you that we do release new episodes of the show every other Wednesday. We may do some bonus episodes too along the way. And just so you never miss any of those episodes, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Simply search for IsraelCast. It's that easy. And don't forget to rate and review us because that really helps with our rankings, which in turn make it easier for more people around the world to find us and to hear from extraordinary people like Aryeh. Or you can always enjoy the show by visiting us at our website. Once again, it's jnf.org/IsraelCast. Now, it takes a whole moshav to put IsraelCast together. For that, we thank Vivian Grossman, Stefan Oberman, J.D. Krebs, and Ellie Condren. Our editors are Jay Rothman and James Casada from Miratone Studios right here in the very heart of New York City. And the music that you hear at the top and tail of the program is titled My Eden. It's by the very talented Rafi Malkiel from his album Water on the Tzaddik label. IsraelCast is powered by Jewish National Fund USA, your voice in Israel. For more info about JNF USA, do visit jnf.org. And if you'd like to write to us with story ideas or just to say howdy, I know Aryeh would love to hear from you, and so would I. So do email us at israelcast@jnf.org. Meantime, I'm Steven Shalowitz. Thank you for tuning in and looking forward to having you join us on future episodes of IsraelCast.